All right, so picture this. You grew up watching anger, silence, pride, or addiction rule the house. Now you're older, telling yourself, I'll be different. You read the Bible, listen to sermons, and speak better words. But when the pressure hits, you sound just like your father, react just like your uncles, and wonder why the cycle keeps repeating. But the truth is, you teach what you know, but you reproduce what you are. And here's why. The reason kind of goes deeper than what you say. It's about what shaped you. You didn't just hear how they live, you were formed by it. Their habits became your instincts, their wounds became your worldview. What you watched every day became your normal. Even when you swore you'd never be like them, because the transformation doesn't come through information, it comes through formation. And unless you let God break what you built, you'll keep rebuilding the same broken patterns in your own life. But here's good news. You don't have to stay who you were raised to be. God isn't just calling you to talk better. He's calling you to become new. And it starts in that secret place, in surrender, in letting Jesus heal the boy inside of you so that you can be the man he's calling you to be and stand up and be whole. The next generation isn't just listening to your words, they're watching your life. Break the cycle by becoming the man you never saw. Be the blueprint God designed. So today, guys, I want to talk to you guys about us as men breaking generational cycles that have been caused in our life because of it being as simple as this. You teach what you know, but you reproduce what you are. So as a young boy growing up, if you're blessed not to have your father, he becomes your role model. He becomes your the person you mimic, the person you want to become. He becomes the person that you want to be like the most. And that could be for better or for worse. Like I was saying at the beginning of this video, you reproduce what you are. You know, you teach what you know, but you reproduce what you are. So um unfortunately, a lot of the times, us men and growing up, we're boys, we start off getting caught up in that cycle of the men around us and us reproducing in ourselves who they are. Say, for instance, if you had an uncle in your life, you had a dad in your life, a brother in your life, just about 9 times out of 10, the men in our lives when we're growing up shape who we become. I believe it's the as you're saying, the 5 closest people in your circle are become the sum of who you are. I think it's how the saying goes. And it's very, very true that um growing up, unfortunately, we can become as kids anyway, unfortunately we can become collateral damage in somebody else's cycle of life. But ultimately, it's up to us to break that cycle in the end of the day once we realize it. Because, you know, as kids, we're not going to realize it. You know, as kids, we're gonna see it for what we perceive it as and just roll with the punches. You know, as a kid, you might have grew up seeing your parents fight. You might have saw your dad put hands on your mom, and now as an adult, you know, you think it's okay to do that. You think it's okay to put your hands on a woman, and that's not right. And ultimately, you know, it's you're a product of what your dad reproduced. But at the end of the day, you're now a grown man. You're now a grown man, and you have the choice to not continue to reproduce that cycle. You have the choice to break the cycle and become the man that you never saw. As men, God are calling us to lead. We're designed to lead, not only in, you know, our house, but our communities, our churches. You know, we're designed to lead. And you can't just lead by, you know, spatting out rules and the way things are supposed to be, because people are going to follow suit what they see you do. If you're not moving how you're preaching, then it's all going to be void. So if you're teaching goodness, teaching you need to live life like this, but you're living life that's totally opposite of what you're preaching and teaching, then, you know, you might come across a person that you taught, hey, do this, do good, do that, and then they see you doing the exact opposite, and that affects them in a horrible way that is detrimental towards their faith and their walk with life. And unfortunately, that happens a lot of the time to us men, where, you know, our parents, you know, our dads or our uncles, they'll tell us to do certain things a certain way, but ultimately we're gonna follow suit because of what we see them do. So I know growing up, parents would be like, no smoking, no drinking, none of that. But sometimes you might see them smoking or drinking, and you think, yeah, okay, that's okay. If they're doing it, it must be okay for me to do it too at a certain point. Maybe not right now because I'm a kid, but when I get older, yeah, I remember my parents used to drink, they used to smoke. I might need that too now that I'm an adult to cope with stress like they did. And ultimately you're repeating that same cycle by doing that. And yeah, so I want to share some words from the Bible with you guys to help kind of showcase why it's so important to not only teach what you know, but to put that into practice so you can reproduce what you know as well, to be good and to be the truth. Because if you put the words of God into practice, then you're acting out who God is calling you to be ultimately through the word of God. So with that being said, I want to share a verse with you guys in Luke chapter 6, verse 40, that says, "The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher." And I like to think that this verse shows that you just don't pass on information, but you reproduce your likeness in those you lead through your actions. So you might teach formally and by the book, and they see that, but if your actions don't align up with what you're teaching, ultimately your actions are going to speak louder than those words that you teach. So it's very important to understand that how you carry yourself, how you act, how you walk is a visual representation of your heart. Because you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. So try to remember that, if you're a pastor, if you're uh, at a higher position in your job and you try to teach somebody how to do something the right way, by the book, but you end up doing it a way that you think is a little bit quicker, but is not by the book or not, how it should be done. And then that person goes and follows that, and then he gets in trouble because he learned from you how to do that, but you aren't doing it the right way. Your actions carry weight, not just your words. You can talk a big talk, but if you ain't walking the walk and people see that, it's going to cause a tremendous ripple effect, not only in your lives, but then the lives of people around you because of the consequences of your actions. Um, and Philippians chapter 4, verse 9, it says, "Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." And that was Um, um, Paul saying that to the church of Philippians, because he understood he wasn't just teaching. He understood that he was being imitated. He understood that his actions were being mimicked by the new Christians, the other church bishops, or not bishops, but the other church leaders and people trying to spread Christ in that first century after the death of Jesus Christ, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, excuse me. So like Paul was saying, Paul understood that, hey guys, it's not just what we're teaching here. You also have to walk the walk. You also have to put it into practice and it be how you live your life for people to fully receive the gospel and the message that we're preaching. Because if I'm out here saying, hey, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, follow Jesus Christ and his teachings like I do, but you see me doing crazy stuff, then it's gonna be like, hey, I don't know if I can trust that guy and what he's preaching. When I see him, doing this, that, and the third, when he's not supposed to be, and he preaches these other things, you have to look at the way of your actions and everything that you do, because your actions are the sum of your heart and who you are. Um, for instance, in First Corinthians chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." Leadership isn't just telling people when to go, where to go, and how they're supposed to do it, but it's living in a way that they can copy. That's true leadership. True leadership is living in a way where people can not only take what you're teaching them verbally, but see how you're walking physically and imitate it. See how you're moving in your work and your communities and your family, and imitate it in their lives. That's true leadership. And that leadership, as Paul is saying, is the example of Christ. What better example of leadership, example of love, example of understanding, of caring, of compassion, of righteousness that you can have than Christ? Follow the example of Christ, and if you put that to practice, that's the best way, that's the best form of leadership and form of a godly man that other men around you, other young men around you can imitate and copy. And the people around you, the women that are around you that are, your mom, your wife, your daughter, they can gain something from knowing that, hey, that's the type of man I need in my life. That's the type of son that I wanted. That's the type of husband I wanted. That's the type of dad that I need. Leading is setting an example, not just telling you what the example is. Leading is setting that example. In Titus chapter 2, verses 7 and 8, it says, in everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech. Teaching is backed by how you live, not just what you say. Teaching is backed by if you're putting your own teaching into practice. You can't just say something and try to tell somebody how to do something one way that you feel like is the right way and not do it. And for us Christians, that's very important because we can't tell people to follow the commandments of God and not do them ourselves. We can't tell people, hey, don't commit adultery, and then go look at a woman lustfully and commit it in our hearts ourselves. Whatever it is, you cannot teach and preach something that you're not doing, because then it won't be heard, it won't be received. And as Christians, that's why it's so important, because we're trying to spread the good news, the best news that anyone could ever receive in their lives. And if we're trying to share that with them, but we're living our lives crazy, then they're going to look at us like, how is Tommy following Jesus and he out here smoking and drinking and partying every weekend? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And if they do receive that form of Jesus, that's not the right way of Jesus. That's not the Jesus that they need to receive and follow, because it's Jesus that we all know, we're supposed to follow, tells us that we need to sin no more. Forgives us of our sins, but tells us to go and sin no more. So that doesn't mean you can just, hey, I'm good, I'm covered by the blood, I can go drink, smoke, do this, that, and the third, and feel unconvicted, because that's not what God's calling us to do. That's not how Jesus is calling us to live our lives. Not only does that apply, just in general sense, but it also applies in our families. If you're a husband, if you're a dad, Proverbs 22, chapter 6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Our example shapes future generations. Our example, for better or for worse, shapes the people around us. Our children, if you teach your children young how they're supposed to live in life, and you show them, not only teaching them that, but you show them that, as it says in Proverbs, he would not depart from it. Because not only did he hear it from his dad, but he saw it from his dad, and they saw how it benefited his dad. It saw how it made his dad strong through the hard times, and a blessing in the good times. So just try to remember that our example shapes future generations, and how we not only teach them, but how we carry ourselves will affect the people around us. And I think to tie this all together, in Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 through 18, he says, by their fruit you will recognize them. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Matthew says that beautifully. What you reproduce is a reflection of who you are at the root. So if you're producing good fruit, that's a reflection of your heart. That's a reflection of who you are. But if you're producing bad fruit, that is also a reflection of who you are. If you're a good guy following things and doing things by the book the right way, then the fruit that you reproduce is going to be a good fruit that is going to be plentiful, that is going to be fruitful for the people around you. But if you're a bad guy, living bad ways, the fruit that you're going to produce is going to be a bad fruit. And that fruit can not only be in your life, but it can be in the life of people around you. You know, you can be planting a seed in those other people's life that you affect the most, like your son, your daughter, you know, your mom, your dad, your wife. Try to remember that. Try to remember that how I carry myself, that there are people watching. There are people that not only hear what I say, but see what I do. And if I'm not walking how I'm talking, if I'm not putting into practice what I'm preaching, they're going to see it. And it's going to hurt others in their lives in ways that they have to recognize and break out of because of what I did. You know, so try to remember, guys, as men, that you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. It's very important because we're setting up the next generation um, with how they should live through our example. So try to remember that, guys. Appreciate you guys checking out today's teaching. Like and subscribe for more content, guys. If you want to support the channel further than that, please check out our merchandise at JesusInJapan.store, guys. We have some fire bold merch that are conversational pieces, I should say. Merchandise that help you share the gospel. Each piece, I like to say, helps you share the gospel in a way that it's easy to break the ice because it's a shirt, you know. People are like, hey, that's fire. What is it? What does it mean? And you can explain, oh, this shirt right here, this jacket, this sweatshirt that I have in particular, oh, that's the four horsemen of apocalypse. And then on the back, you know, I have basically kind of a message that you can share the gospel with in one verse from Revelation that explains stuff. I'll put it up on the screen, guys. But if you want to support the channel any further than just liking and subscribing, guys, go grab you some Jesus in Japan merch. You will not regret it. I promise you. Other than that, thank you guys for watching the video. And wow, just thank you, Holy Spirit.